Next session, building against all odds. All these problems are there, these challenges are there. How do we counter them? We discuss in detail the debt restructuring, private financing, retrofitting of existing infra, building new infra when we're talking about smart cities, greenfield, brownfield projects, setting standards for these new infra. And we also look forward to a lot of your participation as we move into this panel. So would like to invite here the panelists, first inviting the panel chair, Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya, partner KPMG, convener for economic standards for Smart Cities, Bureau of Indian Standards, Government of India. Our panelist, Professor M.N. Srihari, advisor to the Government of Karnataka and road safety expert for NHAI. Mr. Sanjeev Kaushik, the Deputy Managing Director, IIFCL. Mr. Sanjay Palve, the Senior Group President, Corporate Finance and Corporate Banking, Yes Bank. And Mr. Ramakant Jha, the CEO of Smart Cities, ILNFS. So I now request Mr. Jha to please take over from here as we start the panel.
Thank you. I think there's a bit of a confusion, but thank you and very good afternoon. I think most of the issues concerning this panel have been very well highlighted by Mr. Deosali, and I don't think we need to revisit the issues in that sense because it was so well captured. And given that we have a very eminent panelist, I think it will be worthwhile to hear their views rather than coming back with what the issues are. But overall, let me just give a glimpse of what's really going on in the sector. And I have some statistics that I put in over here. As of December 15th, 2015, in power sector there were 65 stalled projects worth over $37.9 billion. Coal, there are 13 stalled projects worth about $4.5 billion. Roads and highways, about 34 stalled projects worth $7.6 billion. And railways is 84 stalled projects worth over $15 billion. What does these numbers really mean? If we do a quick addition, it shows up that these numbers add up to about 3% of India's GDP. And that's a very, very significant portion. And 3% invested into infrastructure would have had very significant multiplier effect. So you can imagine if this investment had gone in, our GDP would have gone up by at least 4 to 5% now. And we could easily be looking at a 10% growth rate as we speak. And that hasn't happened because we have our projects stuck up for the reasons that Mr. Deosali had been amplifying. I think that's basically what we're looking at in terms of why we're having such a situation. How do we handle the various kinds of bottlenecks and how do you leverage the opportunities that are showing up as of today? And I'll start with you, sir. Since you have been advising Government of Karnataka also, what in your views are the key challenges in this sector?
Of course, the challenges are plenty. It has been already discussed for the morning. In fact, to talk a little positive way, positive direction, all these challenges should be converted to opportunities. That's where the planners, designers, construction people, they should come into there. In fact, most of the projects in India, as a matter of fact, we take more time to construct it, there is less time for planning. I have seen most of the projects under JNNRM schemes. The March 31st is the last working, the financial year day. March 30th they sit it, prepare something and they pass it on to the Government of India for sanctions. Unfortunately, one day planning will take several years execution of the work. There is rather unfortunate schemes. Whereas a thorough planning will begin. Other countries take more time for thorough planning. Then they execute very fast. All the bottlenecks, what we talked today, what we have spoken today, what is going to tell now, is all because of the bad planning. So once, of course, designers are always good. A lot of consultants are there, highly qualified consultants are available, integrated people is there. Designs are always perfect, we don't do. But on the other hand, the construction, execution, and materials used for the construction, there we have a lot of bottlenecks. Of course, apart from this, as usual, we have the bottlenecks related to the land acquisition, which is the biggest challenge, the political interference, and the financial crisis. All this thing will happen, no doubt. But to address these things, first of all, I want to have underlined here, the political feasibility should come first. Afterward, technical feasibility, then financial, all these things to come. In India, we do all the feasibilities and all get approvals, everything. Finally, it goes to political feasibility. There is the entire project will be shelved up there at that point of time. More to the projects which were planned, already designed, you would go to consultants also, spending crores of rupees sometimes, will shelved back because of one decision from the political interference. That is a major source of problem. And the delay in finances, as already pointed out just now, most of the time the projects get delayed due to the financial allocation of funds. As and when it is needed, financial will be made available so that the project can take off very quickly in the right time, right direction and all. Now we ask for example, 1,000 crores. So every year they are giving 5 crore, 10 crores. It will never see any project in the day. That's how the most of the metro projects, though it is called SPVs, is getting delayed because of those problems. And what are the amounts sanctioned by the state government or government of India or any other means, getting delayed due to that reason. And I am sure the smart city is what we are looking for now. There is something mistake in calling it a smart city. Because I don't want to use the word smart. It is a sustainable, livable city, not a smart city. The smart city concept has come from other countries, already developed countries. They are working more beyond the datum. In India, for anything and everything, we have to fight and get the things. The basic amenities, basic infrastructure, water, power, housing, education, hospitality, our hospitals, roads, all these things will be, we are not even to the datum level also. When many people, still we are wondering what is this. So instead of calling a smart city, we have to call a sustainable city for the future, because we don't want to change in between. We have to walk through the direction of this thing. And finally, the allocation of funds also should come as and where. It is rightly pointed today morning also, we are not thinking in developing a big cities as a smart cities. But it is better to take little cities away from the big cities, so that if you develop the tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, or smart villages, or smart towns, or smart temple towns, in that kind of things is very much required. When you develop parallelly those infrastructure requirements for those places, I am sure we are developing the neighboring or the surrounding places also, so that the people need not come and migrate to the main cities also. That is where we have problem for the infrastructure like water, power, housing, all these things, even transportation. I am sure in Bangalore, which I come from Bangalore, the vehicular speed in the evening peak, particularly outer ring road, has come to 4.48 kilometers per hour. It is less than the walking speed of the human being. They are very, very unfortunate, because the human being walking speed will be 10 kilometers per hour at least. Now it has come to 4.48 kilometers for the outer ring road, a notorious place called Silk Board Junction, and to the Kerpuram like that. So this is where we are lacking. More to the things, we come half the way through. We plan for BRT, again BRT goes off, we plan for metro, we plan for steel flyover, we plan for so many infrastructure, nothing will come to the light at the end of the day. And people are made to suffer again and again. Even the water supply schemes, a good potable water, we are unable to get it. 3 days, you can see from Bangalore, when aerial view or another place, you can see so many water tanks at the rooftops. Why this water tank? Because we have to store the water for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days like that. So a system should be evolved such that we need not ask for any infrastructure. It is to start with the basic infrastructure, what I call. This is very, very important. And the infrastructure challenges plenty, no doubt, but handling the challenge itself is very difficult. Because it has come through, most of the things comes through the political things now. And finally, what we want to say here, the cash flow, it should be sustainable cash flow. For example, whatever the amount spent, for example, I need a project for 5 years, the total cash flow based on the work is to be keep on distributed year by year so that the project can take place irrespective of the government, irrespective of the system or the corporation or development authority will come into picture. And we don't have good auditability. That's where we are lacking. We don't know whether we're going in the right direction, whether it's auditable one, whether it's financial auditable one, or technical auditable one. Simply we are keep on doing without assessment, without auditing also. That's why finally we'll end up with something different, which we have to demolish the structure little later. That is, every stage is very much required. And also finally the great stage will be converting these challenges to opportunities. It lies with all of us. We should convert all these challenges, basic challenges, what is discussed in the morning today, to convert into opportunities. I am sure things will go with the coordination, cooperation of the people. Many times people are not aware what is smart city at all. We have to tell them, we have to create awareness, we have to create education for them, we have to tell the priorities also what they look for that. So even though most of the people, though they are educated, many are unaware of the things what is happening around here. So the property is very, very important to know that what is the smart city, whether it is a sustainable we want it, whether it's a quality city we want it, or whether livable city we want it, and what are the infrastructure requirements we have to go for such things by prioritizing the events. And by one by one we have to go to take it to a successful thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Srihari. So taking off from what you're talking about, Mr. Srihari, that we need to spend more time in planning. And that's where we'll get more sustainable infrastructure, sustainable both from an environmental perspective and financial perspective. That takes me to Mr. Jha, who has been involved in one of the first smart cities in this country, the GIFT City. And clearly they had spent enormous amount of time in planning, and the result shows up now in an absolutely state-of-the-art city coming up, which is world-class by any standards. However, Mr. Jha, the challenge is not with greenfield cities, which are well planned, but the challenges are with brownfield, which is where most of the country lives in. And the challenges involve ownership of property, ownership of right-of-way, ability to retrofit, and so on and so forth. So, Mr. Jha, we would like to have your views on what are the challenges in rolling out brownfield smart cities or smartifying brownfield cities, and how we can do that in a more efficient manner.
Smart city has become a key word nowadays, but it is basically to open the mindset. And people are perceiving in different ways. In fact, when we are developing a first smart city, really integrated smart city GIFT, Gujarat International Finance Tech City in Gujarat, which was a pet project of Mr. Modi. I was called by the Honorable Minister of Urban Development, and he asked me a question that, what is smart city? We have been talking, but tell me, you have implemented, so tell me what is smart city? So I told him, sir, smart city is nothing but providing in a city a good quality of life, good business environment, and good governance. If you fulfill these three things, that becomes a smart city. You may give any terminology, but basically first we are concerned with the basic amenities, quality of living. And without economic base in the city will not be sustainable. So there has to be employment opportunity, for that there has to be investment. There has to be business environment, for which you require a good environment. And third is for ease of doing business, ease of your living, you require a good governance, so that law and order, your grievance approval, redressal, even paying your bills, this becomes very easy if you use technology. So technology comes last. But in fact, most of the people who are today, when we talk about a smart city, they put technology as the first. Make a smart street lighting, CCTV, and they consider that's a smart city. So first of all, we have to have in our mind that we are at the stage that we have to address the basic things. And naturally that has been a challenge, because telling that giving a good quality of life is a very simple word. But how to achieve it? A lot of planning is required. As I told you, it's a little easier in a greenfield project, but in a brownfield project it's very difficult. I give you one example of Mumbai, where I have worked for over 35 years. We have been trying to set up UMTA, that is a Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority. And we have been trying for last 15 years. And we worked out that about 20 agencies are involved in providing transport facilities in the city. 20 agencies. Now bringing them together under one umbrella, that is called UMTA, UMTA, has been a big challenge, and we have not been successful. Why? Because of the mindset. Everybody is so possessive in the departmental that they do not want to give up their freedom. Now this initiative has to come as a directive and phase by implementation, so that mindset changes. So I find that biggest challenge in brownfield project is the mindset. People are speaking that we should have a smart city. Everybody wants a smart city. But they don't want to change their way of working. I have been interacting with various municipal corporations, state government in my present assignment. And I find that the corporators, Government of India has put a condition that you have to have SPV for implementation of a smart city project. Now, SPV will be empowered to take decision, investment, everything. But in the process, the corporators will lose their power. And therefore, they are not supporting. In fact, many of the cities have won back, but they do not want a smart city because of this conflict of interest. So we have found that this has to be addressed, because this is a transformation change. It cannot take overnight. Therefore, the most demonstrative project becomes the greenfield project, so that you can implement, so that benefit to the people, and gradually the mindset will change. But if you want to make changes overnight and implement smart city project as it is, probably it will be very difficult. So we have to understand the socio-economic characteristics of the country. We are not like China, the dictatorship, that you order and it is done. In democracy, everybody has a right to agree or disagree. And therefore, this has to be a chart. There has to be a stepwise implementation of this scheme. Then only it will be successful. That's why we find that we have been talking for last 2 years about the smart city. But we have not gone beyond submitting proposals. Why? Because of this mindset. And we have to break this. Therefore, as you told, the challenges of brownfield project is basically the mindset. There is no dearth of money, there is no dearth of talent in the people to implement it. The problem here in our country is the mindset.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. I think that's a very important point to mention. But having said that, you said there is no dearth of money. I think the qualifying phrase probably you meant was there is no dearth of money for valid projects, or projects where the revenue is ring-fenced and there is visibility to it. Having said that, we have seen in China hundreds of ghost smart cities. cities have been built up and metro is running and cafeterias are opened up, but nobody living there. And essentially these are cities which do not have a sound economic basis. They do not have revenues getting generated. They have been just created for the sake of being created. That brings me to Mr. Sanjeev Kaushik on how do you think we should be funding these large infrastructure in general and city rejuvenation specifically in a manner that is financially sustainable? And what are the challenges that you see over there?
Sure. Thank you for that. Before I go on to address your specific question, I just wanted to hang on to one thought that I found fascinating when Mr. Devsali was talking about all the various problems that beset the sector. I think, sir, you were talking about the fact that all the stakeholders need to come together before in the initial planning stage itself. And the issue of political will and political risk actually being as important. I think that is an excellent suggestion which more and more is being recognized not only across Government of India but also the states. I've worked in the state government of Kerala and now I'm in the Government of India, as you know. I think what needs to happen is some kind of an infrastructure single window clearance type panel, a high priority panel. Now such a panel is currently, maybe not by that very name or label, but it is functioning in the Prime Minister's office. But the focus of that panel presently is pretty much uninstalling or reviving stalled projects that have been stalled for a length of time. But even for new projects, I think simply getting all concerned parties to agree together and to get everything, so the panel has decided and for deemed clearance or automatic clearance, start the work. This is something that we did in Kerala when we were implementing the earlier failed Vizhinjam port project. We were building a port near Trivandrum, which had failed twice in the bidding stage. And the third time we actually got all parties to sit together. We got everyone to agree. We got all the clearances in place, land acquired, and then only we move forward for the bidding and other things. So I think that's a very important learning that all of us must take from this. And if we can urge the respective powers that would be key. But going on squarely to the question that has been posed to me by the panel, in terms of financing, there are certain key issues to note. At the very initial stage where the project is on the drawing board, I think it is important for the promoters to recognize the true estimates that, so for example, if I'm building a Yamuna Expressway, which is going to be a super highway going to Agra, but then I overestimate or hike up the traffic that I foresee of 10, it's very difficult, first of all, to estimate some of these things. What kind of traffic flow, what toll will come in. But I think it is important to be realistic and not just keep the bidding parameters or the initial outflow in mind. I think so the estimation is very important and aggressive bidding has to be avoided at all costs. So one of the things that we are working on is a common appraisal by a team of experts from all banks together, and also to figure out other alternatives, not just the lowest cost bid or the L1, L2 system. Some kind of an averaging of bids received and going to the average bid, not just the lowest bid, to prevent the phenomenon of the lowest cost bid. So the first important point is the promoter has to be very careful not to aggressively bid for projects and to carefully estimate and design the project at the drawing board itself. The second point that we as financial institutions are noticing is that a number of promoters are coming forward in some kind of, I would like to call it a greedy manner, because you're trying to take on too much more than you can chew. So you may not have equity, you may have a very over-leveraged balance sheet, but then you still want to bid and get projects in the hope of, growing out of that. We are seeing some of that happening currently in the hybrid annuity model which the NHAI has just landed. So if NHAI is going to give you upfront 40% of the grant during the construction stage, and the lenders are going to finance the rest, then where is the skin in the game that the promoter is bringing? So the aspect of the upfront equity payment of the promoter himself, he has to find it, and if he does not have equity, he cannot survive on the hope that 1, 2, 3 years down the line, somehow the project will flail along on the basis of the grants or the annuities. So that's another important point to address the financing issues. interest during construction is, and cost overruns is something that the banks look at. When we are appraising and sanctioning projects, we are very careful to think about how during the construction stage, when there are no cash flows, no revenues, how will the interest be serviced, because that is often a cause for projects getting sick. That is inbuilt into the project appraisal, into the project sanction cost, and also cost overruns. Because of all the problems that we have discussed earlier, there are bound to be cost overruns. These are some of the important considerations from the project design aspect. But if you look at where the supply of capital is going to be coming from, first let's look at the equity side of the financing. Infrastructure fund cost currently in India, to my mind, is just way too high. If you're still looking at something like 11 to 13% cost of funds from most of the banks and financial institutions, particularly in the context of smart cities or social projects or even rural development projects, rural infrastructure, there is no way that some of these projects with the sort of revenue receivables that they have are going to be able to service this kind of a high cost of debt. So there needs to be a serious rethink of how the low cost and long-term funds are going to be provided to some of these infrastructure sectors, particularly smart cities. IFCL, which I represent here today, is the nodal agency for channelizing funds from the World Bank to smart cities in the country. We've been charged with the responsibility of selecting and appraising those projects, those smart cities, and then applying for the World Bank funds and getting them provided to these smart cities. So some of the initial worries, I would say, in this appraisal, in the selection process, are bound to be a waste disposal project, for example, or waste management sanitation. Will it be in a position to sustain the sort of debt that they intend to take? Even though the low-cost World Bank funds may be available, you have to be able to service that debt. Sometimes it is thought that the multilateral borrowing, for example, from ADB or the World Bank, is low cost. Well, if you just look at the interest rate from these institutions, it is low cost indeed. But then most of these borrowings involve mandatory hedging. For the dollars to be landed into rupees in the current volatile environment, mandatory hedging has to be taken, which then jacks up the cost. And that, along with the guarantee commission that has to be paid to the government and the commitment fees, it takes the overall cost of some of these projects, mainly smart cities and some of these other projects which are looking at multilateral funds, to upwards of 9.5%. That, to my mind, is unsustainable. Mr. Jha is here and he's been involved with the GIFT City, but sir, I think you will bear me out. Some of these projects would require a lot of hand-holding and interest cost subvention by government, which is going to be an important consideration of financing these projects. Let me also take a minute to mention some of the other products that developers do look at, can look at. We at IFCL have a product called subordinate debt, which is not debt, which sits below debt, but it is kind of quasi-equity. So there is some moratorium period in the beginning when you're in the construction phase. You don't have to service the debt, you don't have to pay the coupon. That gets capitalized, and even though the interest may be slightly higher than pure debt, but it is kind of equity in nature, and it is subordinate in terms of servicing to the pure debt. So that's a product which I think government needs to promote. More and more financial institutions need to be looking at that. You must have seen in the recent papers InvITs being started. I think Ministry of Finance deserves to be congratulated for putting together some of these schemes. The infrastructure debt funds, IDFs, are already existing. They've been slow to take off due to various reasons which I don't necessarily want to go into. But the entire intention and objective of IDFs was to take out historically high cost debt which projects were stuck with, and take that debt out and free up some of that portion. So the benefit for the developers is that you get refinancing at a lower cost. And for the banks and financial institutions, you get space freed up to lend more to the infrastructure sector because your debt has been taken out. Similarly, InvITs you must have read in the recent weeks, new InvITs have been established. I think IRB is one of the first ones. The whole intention there is to provide more of equity flow apart from private equity into the development of infrastructure projects. Moving on from equity side of financing to the debt or the project financing, There have been a number of reform measures taken to ensure that corporate bond market starts functioning and gets deepened in the country. Before I came to IFCL, I was in the capital markets division in DEA, where there was a whole committee and a whole series of papers produced. Unfortunately, not much has moved on the corporate bond market side, but now I see that there is a happy configuration of stars which hopefully will kickstart this, because interest rates are coming down, and also the appetite of public sector banks, which have been the traditional main financiers of infrastructure projects, has really reduced drastically for various capital constraints. So if public sector banks and financial institutions are laden with debt and other problems because of which a space has opened up, there is more and more of an opportunity for promoters and developers to tap the corporate bond market. Having said that, it's not just the corporate bond market. I think the space has opened up for a financial institution which is a specialized lending vehicle for infrastructure. IFCL was created 10 years ago to act as that kind of an infrastructure financing vehicle. So has IDBI been, and the earlier DFIs, ICICI and others. But they have gradually gone away from the role. IDFC is now a bank. IDBI, the less said, the better in the current environment that you must all be following. So for an institution like IFCL, the opportunity is huge to step into the shoes of public sector banks and try and tap this opportunity and lend more and more of low-cost, long-term funds to the infrastructure sector. This is an aspect that we've taken up with government as to how we can be allowed to grow more, how more flexibility and autonomy can be given in terms of products that we can lend, in terms of what we can and cannot do. So this is a dialogue that is currently on in government. From that point, I also just wanted to refer to a newly created entity. Most of you would have read about the NIIF, the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. The intention behind creating this fund by the Ministry of Finance was essentially this, that we need to tap more and more of global infrastructure funding, which is not only low cost and long term, but which can also be easily, for example, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. This can be tapped, and government can then target this and provide these funds to infrastructure projects in the country. This NIIF is very much in the works, and hopefully with time you will see schemes on the road sector and schemes on the renewable energy sector being initially launched, followed by other sectors also. So the whole question of how to source more and more of equity as well as debt funding through new products, through new institutions, and by better design and appraisal and better drawing board kind of design of projects is being tackled in this manner. Those are very summary remarks, but I'm happy to go into each aspect during the question session.
Thank you so much. I think from there, some of the issues and questions one would be having is, one is credit rating of the project itself. Given that India's own credit rating is not too high, the credit rating of the projects becomes subservient to the sovereign credit rating, and therefore the cost of funds is higher. And the second part to it is, and I'm building up the question for Mr. Sanjay Palve, is that is very often in these large infrastructure projects, due to various reasons like land acquisition, the project gets delayed. Once it gets delayed, you have the interest cost of debt building up. And once you've got the interest cost of debt building up without any revenues coming in, that itself becomes an issue. And obviously one can capitalize it eventually. But then to capitalize it, you need more equity, which is a very rare commodity in this market. How do we resolve these issues in the current scenario? How do we take care of credit ratings? How do we take care of the interest component of debt during these situations? And how do we make sure that funding, financing, and issues related to the funds per se do not become a bottleneck for infrastructure rollout?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you have raised a very pertinent question, and especially when the entire banking system is suffering, from this huge pile of non-performing asset, and especially in infrastructure sector. I think the topic for today's discussion is very apt, against odds. In democracy, it's very difficult to get the consensus, but in infrastructure, at least there is a consensus on two parts. One, We need infrastructure for growth, and there are problems in infrastructure sector. So when it comes to solution, I think people have, we keep discussing. I mean, Mr. Devasali made an excellent presentation. I mean, he's been veteran in this field for so long. Everybody is aware of the issue, and of course, one of the big issues is the financing. But at a macro level, if you see, I think there are three parties involved in any infrastructure development, at least in India. One is the government, second is the developer, and third is the lender or the banking, the financial institutions. And unfortunately, it is very difficult, to get all the three parties together and in a constructive manner resolve the problems. I mean, if I have to make a case for lender, today, and I'm sorry, I'm little bit the history of the whole problem, because then you'll understand why most of the restructuring schemes are not working today. If you see, almost 9.1 trillion rupees of loans are sitting in, the bad loans are sitting in infrastructure, and they have seriously impacted the overall performance of the banks. Obviously, banks have become wary of financing infrastructure projects. Now, with this background, government has come out with a lot of restructuring schemes, a lot of new suggestions to take care of this problem. Some of them are, for example, we started with the CDR long back. So easiest way for the lender is to take the project to the CDR, do some kind of deep restructuring and hope that one day the project will revive. I think many CDRs have also failed. Then government realized CDR is not working. So then we got SDR. In SDR, they said let lenders take charge of the project, and within 18 months, they should find a new buyer, hand over the project to the new buyer, and then the debt can be treated as the standard debt. I mean, but it is practically impossible to change the hand for the infrastructure projects in 18 months, and that too also majority stake. It is very difficult. You are not allowed to sell, part of your holding. It has to be a complete sales stake by all the lenders put together. So they found out another mechanism, 5/25. They said, let's at least try some other mechanism where, lenders are allowed to elongate the loans up to 25 years. But again, there only projects above 500 crores were allowed to do that, and only in infrastructure sector. 5/25 is not allowed for the manufacturing sector. After that, they came out with another innovative scheme called S4A. Now that is the sustainable, debt which you need to restructure. Now, first of all, there was no agreement on how do you figure out the sustainable debt. Again, this scheme is available only for the operational project. So, if you see all these schemes which we are talking to take care of the existing problems, they are mix and match. There is no comprehensive resolution or comprehensive scheme from RBI which will ensure that either the permutation combination of all this put together, we will be able to revive the project. I mean, what is the objective? At the end of the day, lenders want to ensure that one, the economic value of the project is preserved, and at the end of the day, if not in 5 years, but maybe in 7 years or 10 years, we get our money back. Unfortunately, in the entire life cycle development of the project, lender is the weakest chain actually. So either it is the concessioner or the concessionaire, which is the basically developer. I mean, these are the two guys who decide many things, and the lenders are either dragged or tagged in the process. So if I have to talk about the existing problem with the banks about all these non-performing assets, it's very difficult. I don't think so banks beyond a point has capability to really play a constructive role, in resolving that problem. And this is where we want government to step in, and especially RBI to step in, because we'll have to segregate the problem. So we have to handle the past history in a certain manner, and we have to look at the future in a different manner. I mean, now government is taking a lot of proactive steps, and the one example given is hybrid annuity in road sector, where government is trying to mitigate the risk to some extent by they themselves participating in the road project. But the fact of the matter is, for us to participate in the future, we need some solution for our past. Otherwise, as Mr. Devasali said, I don't think so banks are very keen to participate in infrastructure financing, because a lending where banks have no control over the underlying process or underlying project, I don't think so it makes any sense from the banks from a commercial lending perspective. Unfortunately, the requirement, the demand supply in the infrastructure finance is also skewed towards banks. And if you look at globally, I don't think so banks are financing the infrastructure on a commercial basis to this scale which happens in India, to be frank. Here the only one available is financing is either, the banks or financial institutions will participate and the project financing is done. But that is not the model which is followed worldwide for many infrastructure projects. And hence, I think the pressure on the banks, again for infrastructure lending is too much. So as a result of, this, the past history, the demand supply mismatch and a very little control over the resolution, I think all this put together, banks are finding it very difficult to right now to participate in the, participate in infrastructure financing. I'm sorry to say, when IFCL is sitting here, but the response to the recent hybrid annuity model by the lenders is very poor. Not many banks have come forward to participate, and the one reason can be, as you said, developer doesn't have the skin in the game. But the fact of the matter is, I do not have any control over the land acquisition, environment clearances. When NHI will allow, the developer to collect the toll, when the, the completion certificate will be issued. The process just keeps dragging, and most of the projects in India are killed not because they were not viable, they were killed because they got delayed so much. The IDC has actually killed the projects. RBI never allows us, or never, I don't have freedom, or the lenders don't have freedom, or banks don't have freedom to say that even if 90 days we don't collect the interest, my asset will remain standard. Now you tell me, in an infrastructure project which is implemented over 5-6 years on an average, or 4-5 years at least on an average, how the 90 days is going to make the difference? Do you think the 90-day NPA rule is appropriate for the infrastructure financing? The answer is no. I think then, if you keep discussing these issues, I think we move towards the thought process wherein probably a separate class of regulations or at least the classification is required for the infrastructure financing. You cannot put infrastructure loan into same bucket as of working capital or a commercial loan, because both from the risk perspective and characteristically, these loans are totally different. You need to give more brother to lender for handling infrastructure loans. You need to classify them differently. We need to have some relief on the infrastructure loans in terms of provisioning. We need to have some incentives also on the infrastructure financing. You can, give some certain percentage of the total loan as a priority sector, can be treated as a priority sector from the bank's perspective. So that makes them more, attractive, and probably banks can participate. So I think if you look at the overall gamut right now, I think it's not really encouraging from the bank's perspective. Neither we are developing alternate means of financing, which is, a lot of talks have been happened on InvIT, IDF, bond market. Especially you said credit rating. I'm happy to say that actually as a bank, we are the first bank to do a credit enhanced, bond in the solar sector, and IFCL and ADB has guaranteed that bond. But I can tell you, it was so difficult to sell that bond in the market. We actually were holding that bond on our books for quite some time. And recently we have started seeing some movement where some pension funds and insurance companies have now understood that instrument, and they have picked up some amount of bond from us. So developing these instruments also is very, very important. Deepening that market is important. There is a separate debt capital market segment available overseas, especially in mature market like Europe and Americas, where the even project financing happens on the bond basis. Today in India it does not exist. I think construction loan, loan during construction has to come from the banks or financial institutions. That is what the underlying principle is in India, which is completely wrong. And government has not done anything to change that, to be frank. When the project becomes operational, the risk changes. I think during that period, at least we are seeing some improvement, where is some credit enhanced structures, IDFs. Those kind of development institutions like IFCL, they are stepping in, and some takeout financing structures are being talked. But I think the biggest challenge is during construction, and the maximum relief, maximum leeway is required to be given during this period. Otherwise, I think infrastructure financing is going to be a big bottleneck going forward in building India's overall, infrastructure growth story, and hence, I mean, it is directly going to affect your GDP aspirations, your overall economic aspirations, and there is no really a comprehensive thought given to it how we can resolve, these issues. To be frank, I mean, bits and pieces it is happening, but I think it's high time, especially the regulator, Ministry of Finance, takes into account the issues the banks are being facing on the existing problems, and probably provide some relief. The relief is required to take this story forward.
Can I just pitch in there with 2 points? I think I agree with most of what you've said. Just wanted to add 2 points on the way the Ministry of Finance is thinking. One is, as you rightly said, these are different kinds of projects, the lending profile, the borrowing, everything is different about infrastructure projects. So the ministry is currently working on a separate rating system for infrastructure projects and making sure that the same rating methodology, the same rating system that the agencies employ for normal projects is not applied. So that will shortly be unveiled. And the second thing is the important point about credit enhancement. IFCL and some other banks are currently doing, 1 or 2 transactions on credit enhancement, but now the thinking is to set up a new credit enhancement corporation as a separate vehicle which will only enhance, partially guarantee bonds that will be issued. And we are working on that with the Ministry of Finance. Hopefully in the next few months that will also be seeing the light of day.
Brilliant. I think that will be quite helpful for the sector. But Mr. Palve, coming back to you, I think you raised very, very pertinent questions and issues. Having heard you, we understand that the hybrid annuity model is not working, which is supposed to be a fix for PPP. PPP wasn't working because the balance sheets got stretched and all the other issues that we talked about. What, in your opinion, are the 1 or 2 key things that needs to be done as an alternative to these 2 mechanisms or as a fix to these mechanisms, which will really help kickstart the sector?
I mean, it may not sound really good, but if you frankly ask me, beyond a point, infrastructure development is government job.
It's a government job.
Yeah. I mean, you take any large project, and I mean, there is if you see even the worldwide, the way infrastructure is developed, China doesn't do infrastructure on PPP model. I mean, I once visited China and, we met some lenders, including some international lenders, and they did some toll financing there. And when the project became operational, the toll dipped. And in terms of governance and other things, those banks just issued the notices to the Chinese government, actually was the developer. I mean, the government called all the banks and overnight they refinanced everybody with the Chinese bank. But keeping that aside, if you really ask me, within this constraint, if we have to move forward and what from the lender's perspective, what should be the 1 or 2 key things, then I would like to summarize as follows. First, I think for the existing loans, yes, as long as the economic value is preserved, a comprehensive, restructuring package is required, whereby lenders get relief on the capital they need to provide for the existing bad loans. And second, going forward for the new loans, I think a separate set of classification is required to give them more breather to handle this kind of problems.
Mr. Shiri, coming to you, we heard some suggestions that there should be a central body to clear all projects and so on. But I've been working closely with the body set up by Prime Minister's office, which doesn't really work with fiat. It works through suggestions in that sense, because clearly the central government doesn't have any jurisdiction over the state government. Also leveraging the constitutional amendment 74 and 73, both the ULBs and the PRIs, Panchayat institutions, are autonomous in that sense. How do we really manage the center-state relationships and the local body relationships so that projects can go smoothly?
See, generally, in such case, center is a different set of government, and state is a different set of government, and corporation may be something mixed like that. With all these complications, we have to create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, specially or exclusively for the smart cities or infrastructure projects. So anyway, whatever the government it could be, whatever the affiliations could be, the finances should be made available irrespective of the government. They should allocate the fund right time for right work. Then only it is workable. For example, as a simple case which I have witnessed in Bangalore, when metro was being envisaged, it was only 3,250 crores in 2010. Even today it is not completed. The total costs have been escalated to 15,000 crores almost. That means going almost 4 to 5 times whose money after all it is. So this is because of the policies, decisions, not making available the funds the right time, the right amount. So now it is created an SPV model also, still we suffered with it. And similarly, on the other hand, the Bangalore International Airport, it has been done under PPP model, which we thought it may successfully take over. But unfortunately, after the thing, it has been come down also again. So now we have changed this pattern also. We relieved this earlier concessionaire, the contractor from that. Then we moved across to our own Indian factor. Overall, I want to say here that now we are developing the airport or the railways or the road transport, whatever it could be. The retrofitting and also the redevelopment or a greenfield. The three issues will come into picture. The retro development, I feel it is a little tougher job because adding up and refurnishing the things and all, it involves a lot of technological know-how and also it involves a lot of cost, all these things. Whereas redevelopment is nothing much disturbing, considering something more nearby neighborhood. Whereas the greenfield totally a flexibility is available, wherein which we can develop in a better way, but that is little away or far from the regular township or the urban areas. So overall to say here, the government should not be the deterrent to this. So whatever we are also facing, every state in India, we are facing different government at different part of the time. Unfortunately, so the case is so for Karnataka also. Whatever the central government, always Karnataka will be opposite that. So it does not mean we should not see any progress at all. It does not. So we too, we want it, but there some coordination committee is required, a central observatory things are required, monitoring things to be required. So all these things put together, will make a project successful now. Infrastructure project, definitely we cannot lose it or we cannot delay it anymore because people lose interest in it. The people, what they thought for, what they're looking for, that should be taken at the right time, right spirit.
Thank you. That brings me to Mr. Jha. You have
Yeah.
comment before asking.
Having heard about the difficulty which you face, I will give you a good example, very successful example. I was involved in the planning and development of Mumbai-Pune Expressway, the first expressway in the country. As you rightly told, we debated on PPP and we found that it will not work because of the so many uncertainties, land acquisition, environmental clearance, local issues, government issues. The estimated cost was about 1,800 crores at that point of time in 1906. And it was decided by the government that it should be done by separate SPV formed by the government. That's called Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation, where I joined. And we applied this principle which you mentioned, that a lot of planning is done in the beginning. Most of the approvals were in place, almost all approvals were in place. And being government organization, it was easy for us to get all the clearances. For private, it became very difficult. Land was acquired. In fact, query permissions were also taken. We also constructed the site offices for the contractor, which will be appointed, including the electric connection to their office, water supply, and after all these arrangements, then we went for bidding. We got very good competitive bidding, and the project which was to be completed in 3.5 years, 4 years, we completed in less than 3 years. And that's an example. Most of you might have traveled on Bombay-Pune Expressway, still very good. And we completed that project in 1,500 crores compared to 1,800 crores. That's an example. And I subscribe that, the initial risk has to be taken by government agency. They are in a position to do it. We got a very good funding also, because most of the things are under your control. But if a private agency comes, then most of the things are not within their control. And the uncertainty start building up. And naturally, he builds up all this in the cost factor, and the cost goes up. For the same project, initially tenders were invited on PPP, and that time the cost quoted was 50,000 crores for that project. 50,000 crores. So that shows that the infrastructure projects, which are in nature, are very difficult in the beginning. During construction period, it should be done by the government agency. And after we constructed, and couple of years of operation, then we hived off and gave it to private agency. And we got all their money which we had spent. So that's the model which government should think, which is a successful model.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's very illuminating. Moving to Mr. Kaushik and having your last words before we open up the panel to questions. What do you think are the one or two key policy interventions that the government must take right now so that we have a continued pace of infrastructure development, not for this year and next year, but for the next 10, 15 years? What are the key fundamental issues we need to change?
That's the easy one. I think the realization has set in that, like the panelists were saying, that most of infrastructure, can you hear me? Most of infrastructure, particularly greenfield infrastructure risk, has to be taken by government. Government has to do these projects. But I think the realization has now set in that even though government may start projects and take them on to a certain stage, there will never be sufficient money to take on everything that the ambition is for, right? So if you take a look at some numbers, a couple of years ago, the Planning Commission estimated that almost $1 trillion is required to execute infrastructure projects over the next few years. Now, nowhere close to that amount of money is what government has at its disposal. So what was thought was that half of this will have to come from the private sector. So therefore, if $500 billion is to come from the private sector, $350 billion typically from debt and the rest from equity, we need to attract more and more of those providers of debt and equity. With what is currently happening to the traditional financiers of debt, namely the public sector banks, that looks like a very tall order. So the first point to understand is that government should be taking on more and more greenfield risk simply because nobody else will. Your people will only come for commercial returns, they will come for risks that can be quantified and managed carefully. So government will have to look for these projects and then quickly get out of them. To give an example of the way this is being done is the new TOT model that the NHAI is following, the toll, operate and transfer. You've built a highway through EPC using contractors, then after it is achieved COD, government can then sell off the rights for tolling and operating that project to other funds and others. So currently we are talking about almost 75 to 80 of such projects that NHAI has which are coming up for rebidding. They are going to be parked in a kind of a fund which will then be sold to private investors, the kind of investors that we were talking about earlier, global pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, who are interested in these projects because there is no greenfield risk anymore. The projects are already completed. So this achieves the purpose that government is able to get out, recycle its capital for other more deserving projects at that particular point of time, whereas you invite infrastructure, commercial type investment into some of these sectors. So the main point to recognize is let government come forward and help take off some of these projects, but then also exit at the right time and recycle the capital. That's the one point that I thought.
We did this. Bombay Connect.
That's a very good idea. Great, thank you. I think we have almost run out of time, but if there is any question from the delegates, we'd be happy to take that. So.
Sorry, I don't have a question, but I have some comments on what was being discussed. The first point I want to mention is, we are talking about private sector participation in infrastructure projects. The current situation is there are not many projects. So Yes, on the one hand, the lending community currently doesn't have capacity or willingness to fund, but the fact of the matter is there are very few projects worth funding. Like in road sector, there are a few projects, and there are some in the renewable energy sector. But apart from that, there is no new investment happening in power because capacity is currently very high, and so country does not need power. So there are not many projects in telecom. So if you look at large infrastructure sectors, there are very few private sector projects which are available for funding. The second point which I want to mention, that is one. The second point, I agree completely that government cannot fund entire infrastructure in India. Yes, in other countries it has happened, but in India it's very difficult given the fiscal situation of the country. I do not think that in the foreseeable future everything will be funded by government. So private sector will have to participate. So ultimately what is required to be done is we have to decide how do we share risks. And this is the model which this hybrid annuity and some of these innovations which are being made is arising out of this risk sharing concept. So that is required to be done more and more. And this, as Sir mentioned about the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, it is a similar model. They did exactly the same thing. They constructed and thereafter they hived it off. So similar such models need to be evolved. The third point which I meant to mention is, in my opinion, a lot of efforts are being made for development of corporate bond markets, which is very important and essential. And I think I do feel that if the government borrowing program is in a very planned manner and it doesn't crowd out private sector, the bond for corporate bond development should happen. And I think today a lot of corporates are going to the market raising money. It's a different matter that there is not much of activity in the secondary market, which I think is a different issue. But I think people are going to corporate bond markets for raising money, and Reserve Bank of India is going to force banking sector to make sure that some of the large borrowers, they go to the bond markets more than banking sector. So this is the third point. I do believe that there is, in the next few years, efforts are being made, and that will be an extremely good development for funding infrastructure. And the last point which you mentioned about planning, I think there are some success stories in India. What happens in our country is that we talk more, and I also talked about problems, but there are several projects which have been successful. And I think we need to make good quality case studies. Why are these projects successful? There, in every sector, in Mumbai-Pune Expressway, if it is a success story, what did we do right in that? Similarly, there are road projects, there are renewable energy projects, there are ports which have been successful, and they're doing very, very well. So I think we need to make sure that these case studies are studied by the government and the private sector and also the lending community, so that the understanding of building infrastructure projects, financing infrastructure projects and running, that becomes smoother and easier. So we need to build good case studies of our own country. And there are at least 20-25 very successful projects which are running in the country through this PPP model. So that should help. That's it. Thank you.
Sir, if I can ask two questions. You were also referring to these projects when you were giving your remarks. So for example, a western state, I don't want to name, a project may be very well designed, it may generate a lot of good, gigawatts of renewable energy. Everything is fine until the state government decides it will not honor its PPA, and therefore the project is not getting for 10, 11 months the dues that the state government owes. I mean, we all know this case. I don't want to name names here. The best of designed projects are subject to these whims, and I'm myself a bureaucrat, I shouldn't be saying this, but the whims and fancies of the different state governments or the change in government. Another project in the same state, a well-designed highway constructed, but suddenly the government of the day decides to exempt from toll or decides that free passes or certain classes of VVIPs will not be tolled. What do you do in such cases, even though you may have taken every precaution and done a very good execution?
Well, I think I don't have an answer for that. If the government starts reneging on its contracts, I think nobody will invest in infrastructure. That's the point which I was making. I think it's very important for government to understand that if you have signed an agreement, you better honor it. If you don't honor it, then in that case, nobody will invest in the country. It will be very, very difficult. And what is happening in this power sector is frightening. People will shy away from investing in those states. If you don't get money for 10, 12 months for your power which is supplied under a contract, where there is a valid power purchase agreement, it's very difficult for me to imagine anybody investing in those kind of states. So this is a problem. This is a definite risk. However, I think you need to have a mixed bag. Probably people need to say, how much do I invest in this sector? So finally, the developers or promoters will take a calculated risk and take a decision. And maybe some projects will be good, some may be bad, something like that will happen. But I think it's a serious matter, and this matter needs to be, in my opinion, taken up at PM's level, PMO, and then there has to be a discussion with the state government that if you don't want to buy power, don't sign power purchase agreement. If you sign an agreement, you better honor it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all those observations. I think we had an excellent discussion on issues related to structuring, issues related to procurement, to financing, and to operations and maintenance of these infrastructure. I'm sure this conversation will continue beyond this panel discussion, and there are many issues that are left unanswered. But with that, I'll thank the panelists for their time and thank you.
Yeah, thank you to all our panelists. I would once again like to invite Ms. Archana to kindly present the mementos to our panelists, starting, I think we start from the moderator itself, thanking Dr. Bhattacharya. Our thanks to Mr. Srihari. Thanking Mr. Ramakant Jha. Thanking Mr. Palve. And thanking Mr. Kaushik. We'll have a group photograph and then we close the session.